Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Josh Rovner, who's a talent change and OD leader and best-selling author of the book Unbreak the System, Diagnosing and Curing the 10 Critical Flaws in Your Company. Welcome to the show, Josh. How are you?
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
Nice to see you.
I'm doing great. Yeah.
I always love when I get to connect with someone on LinkedIn, say hi, and then a few days later, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how this works. It moves fast, doesn't it?
The magic of networking.
Like the world, right? It moves fast.
Exactly. Tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, your background and your journey to where we are now.
Sure, yeah. So like you said, I'm a talent and change and organizational effectiveness leader. I've got more than 20 years of experience working with all levels of small to large corporations to improve their revenues, improve their performance, improve their culture. And, I really came into writing my book because over the course of my career, as I was working with all these companies, I really detected all of these patterns that came up across all the companies that I worked with. And they were common themes that companies struggled with and leaders and executives struggled with, regardless of the industry. And so I thought, finally, I think there's a book here. And my undergrad degree is in communications. I've always loved writing. So eventually I thought, boy, I think there's a book here, and I went ahead and wrote it. Yeah.
It's funny how that's so many times the answer to a lot of the authors I speak to is that aha moment of like, I'm just seeing a trend here. They keeps rolling out over and over again.
It is, and I can't pinpoint an exact, because I get asked a lot, was there an aha moment? And there really wasn't one. It just kind of slowly built over time. And then at some point, I realized that I think there's a book here, but I don't remember the day, or I don't know.
No, I wouldn't expect like that.
Specific day or something like that.
So who's the avatar of the book when you were writing it? Who are you writing this for?
That's a great question. The avatar is a top executive in a company that's not performing financially or otherwise as well as it should.
Mm-hmm. Simple, and that's a lot of people. Unfortunately,
that's a lot of people. And then I think about your podcast here and HR leaders in particular. It works for HR leaders in a couple of different ways, and this is why I was so excited to talk to you. First of all, HR leaders are top executives. Every company has some type of a chief HR officer. So in that regard, the book is written for them as well. But for other HR leaders who may want to become that, and also HR leaders who are dealing with top executives every day and dealing with what top executives do and how the top executives are running the company, the book is really hopefully helpful for them to help them guide and coach the executives that they're working with and help them also see for themselves what's going on in the organization that they might be kind of aware of in their gut, and they kind of feel it, or they have some thoughts about it, but they haven't really been able to intentionally explain or articulate, even in their own minds, let alone to others, what is really going on that's holding the organization back.
Mm-hmm. Is obviously the strapline of the book is diagnosing and curing the 10 critical flaws in a company. I'm sure people are thinking, what are those? You'll give it away. Like, no, you have to read the book first. Could you tell us the flaws? And was there really 10, or did the publisher say, let's round that up to 10? Let's round it up or down to 10 so it sounds nice.
Well, actually, 10 was just a happy accident luck.
Oh, no way. Really?
Honest to God. Yeah. I just, as I was kind of writing it all out, I didn't have that as a set number by any stretch. I just was writing down what my thoughts were. And then as I started to look at all of the different thoughts that I had and all of the different concepts that I was talking about, it was like, I think it was like 13 or 14 originally. And then I sort of looked at them and went, I think these two are kind of similar. We could probably combine those into one. And then it really just by dumb luck wound up at 10. And I thought, that's really, that's nice. So that really worked out well.
Yeah. So what are they?
So they are politics, blind spots, scapegoating, unclear goals, doing too much, dysfunctional infrastructure, no standard operating procedures, fixing the unfixable, legacy technology, and chasing shiny objects.
You just described my whole company now.
That's what I can't tell you how many times people have said exactly that.
People listening are like, oh man, you're just pointing out all of the...
God, right? And that's really the point.
That is true.
That's why I did it.
Yeah.
Because I knew that no one really thought about this in this way. And there's so much out there that is intended to help leaders become better leaders. And I mean, particularly in the HR space, all of talent management and leadership development, there's a lot of great stuff. And, we were talking about Marshall Goldsmith and Josh Bersin and everything, a lot of stuff on how as a leader to develop yourself. But the gap that I found was that it's great to be able to develop yourself, but as a leader, as a top executive in particular, you don't, and even as an employee, you don't operate in a vacuum. So it's great to improve yourself as a leader, but ultimately the way you're really doing that is by applying it to the company that you work for and that you work in and that you're leading. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do that, then you're really not improving as a leader. And I saw that the vast majority of problems in companies are situational. They have to do with much more than just the people. And actually, I talk about the critical flaw of scapegoating that I just mentioned. And this is where also it ties in very directly with HR. People are the most common scapegoat in companies. When things go wrong in companies, I can't tell you how many times I've heard some variation of, well, we just don't have the right people in the right jobs, or we just don't, not everybody's a talent, and we need to just make sure we get a talent. Sometimes you hear, especially HR leaders, sometimes you hear, well, HR is just not doing a great job hiring the right people. There's that double scapegoat there. But that said, what I've found throughout the course of my career and all the research that I've done along with it is that problems in companies generally are not a result of individuals or even of people collectively. It's the entire infrastructure of the company. It's the system. Mm-hmm. And all companies are systems. And there's a great book, a great leader and writer in the space, a guy named Gary Rumler, who wrote a book called Improving Performance, Managing the White Space on the Organizational Chart. It was a book from a lot of years ago, but he came up with one of my favorite quotes, which actually inspired the title of my book. And that quote is, when you put good people up against a broken system, the broken system wins almost every time. So I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. And so that's what led me to write the book called Unbreak the System and explore, okay, what really is the system? What are the things that are really going wrong inside the company? And let's talk about that directly. Let's address those things directly. And, like you said with the subtitle, there's an element of diagnosis with it, because scapegoating, that critical flaw, is really like a doctor misdiagnosing a disease that you have. And as you're treating a company like a system, as a leader or as an HR leader working with other leaders to help the company and help those leaders get better, it really is helpful, I've found, to look at it like a doctor-patient relationship and look at yourself as a doctor that's trying to see what's going on in the body of your patient and in the mind of your patient. And that's the system of the company.
And a lot of what you just said, those 10 critical flaws, I noticed that the vast majority are people related as opposed to technology. Technology is, I think, one of the 10.
Well, so there are several that seem people related, but aren't, but are also influenced by the ones that are real infrastructure or system related. So
Okay.
the people related, and I think, and that's actually a distinction that I realized, and now after I wrote the book, and now talk about very specifically. So kudos to you for picking up on that, spot on. So there are people ones, right? So scapegoating is one that is directly related, that people do. Blind spots, that's also a people related flaw, because it's something that you as a person, you as a leader or an executive don't see, even though other people see it. Another one is fixing the unfixable, because that's you as a leader choosing to
continuously
place the focus on trying to fix the underperformers when that's not really what you should be doing, but you're deciding to devote a whole lot of time, energy, and resources to fixing things that can't be fixed when you should be focusing elsewhere. So that's certainly kind of a people-centered one. And then, of course, politics is hugely people-centered, because it's people who are deciding to engage in politics. And they do that because, they have blind spots and they don't know exactly what's going on. They try to fix the unfixable rather than diagnose the real root cause of the issues. And when fixing the unfixable doesn't work, then they scapegoat. And so when you scapegoat, then again, that's another way of misdiagnosing what's really going on. And so then you wind up chasing shiny objects, which is another people-centered flaw. And that leads to doing too much, because you're chasing the shiny objects. You're just trying to make the next quarter's numbers, or you're just reacting to whatever the competition is doing and trying to do that. And that leads to your thinking of, well, gosh, we have to get all this done and we can't just focus. We've got to do 50 million things, and because we don't really know what.
It's like a vicious circle.
It is, right? And so you're doing too much. And then that often leads to unclear goals. So when goals are not clear, then it's really hard for people to achieve them, and it's hard for your company to move the needle on its performance in that way. And then Gesundheit.
Yeah.
And then following that, underlying all of that are the systemic issues. So that's where you get into dysfunctional infrastructure, which when I talk about the infrastructure of a company, it's the organizational design and the organizational chart, right? You may have, and the biggest issue here is you've got a siloed functional organizational design where, sales reports up to sales and finance reports up to finance, and they're all doing their own things in their own silos, and no one is really talking to each other, when all of the processes and all of the products and services that your company does and provides require cross-functional collaboration across all of the different functions. But your organization is not set up to do that, right? So that's one component of it, along with compensation and recognition, right? Sometimes you want people to change. You want people to do things a different way, and yet they're compensated and or recognized for doing it the old way, or there's no compensation consequences or recognition consequences for not doing it the new way. Also, part of the infrastructure is expectations and feedback, and how organizations build that structurally. And again, you can see that's much broader than just the people, right? And then, of course, there's tools and resources. That's another big part of the organizational infrastructure. A lot of times, companies don't have proper resources to get things done, and they don't have tools to help their employees get things done the way to produce the best outcomes. So it's that dysfunctional infrastructure, the org design itself, the tools and resources, the expectations and feedback, and the compensation and recognition. And then you have that other critical flaw of no standard operating procedures. Maybe you have all this stuff, but you haven't bothered to write down the best way for people to do certain processes to produce consistently the best outcomes. And sometimes you just haven't done that at all, especially if you're moving fast because you think it's not that
That's
important.
me basically.
Yeah.
Right now, as a startup, we're in that phase where we're moving 100 miles an hour, but that information's in Chris's head.
Right.
And it needs to
be, that's going to bite you.
It is already, we're feeling it. So it's something, it's a benefit in the beginning because you could just move, you move so quickly. But now as we hire more people and we grow the business, I need to start taking that information from in here and putting it into a structured process for the team and to replicate that same success.
Absolutely. And so sometimes even when people do that, and even when companies do that and they document their processes and have standard operating procedures, another variation of what I call the critical flaw of no standard operating procedures is actually if you have them, but they aren't done in the right way. Because so many standard operating procedures are written as what you need to do, but not how or why you need to do it, or more importantly, how do you make decisions when you're doing that particular process, and how do you make the best decisions along the way? That's really what's inside people's heads that doesn't get out and really needs to be part of the most effective.
That's true, because you're not putting the why and the what in there. I definitely focus on the how, but it's the why is not. I wouldn't say many of our processes, if I gave it to you, would say the why, the purpose.
Yep.
Interesting.
And the what exactly is the expected outcome, and how do you judge whether the outcome is up to your standard?
What success looks like.
Right. That's another thing that's always
needs to be defined. And then it's just like, and then you have a conversation with someone and they're like, well, that's my definition of what success is versus yours. And all of a sudden you don't meet expectations. And there's
And then that leads to stuff like, and then as that dynamic grows, that leads to stuff like our performance reviews are really subjective. And my manager does this, but some other manager, why don't I,
definitely going to affect engagement.
Have to do that, right? And it's going to affect your employee engagement. And then before you know it, it snowballs. And now you're talking about a big culture issue. And, the final component of this, the final flaw that I mention in my book, but the only one that I haven't talked about yet, it's part of tools and resources of dysfunctional infrastructure, but it's so big that that it's its own thing in my book. It's its own critical flaw, and that's legacy technology. And sometimes for companies that have been around for a while, it's legacy technology that's been around that, isn't being replaced. But it doesn't have to be just legacy technology. Sometimes it could be new technology, but it just doesn't work the way you need it to. And so that's something else kind of underlying all of it. And it all works together, right? Because those things, dysfunctional infrastructure, unclear goals, doing too much, legacy technology, no standard operating procedures. When those flaws happen, that oftentimes leads to the people-centered flaws of scapegoating and politics, right? So in addition to the fact that sometimes people do that stuff on their own.
Yeah.
It really, again, you have to see it in context. And whenever there's politics in an organization, you have to look at the context and you have to look at the system, because bad culture doesn't just happen on its own. Bad culture, low employee engagement, high turnover, and then also ultimately poor financial results, because that's really what everything boils down to in companies anyway, especially if you're a top executive.
Yeah. Why is it then that?
From that.
Why is it then? Even when you just outlined the 10 flaws, I immediately recognized that in myself and the company. I'm sure so many people did that was listening right now. Why is it that we know that, but we still? Why is it that I know some of those things are flaws, but I still don't get around to fixing them?
Great question. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think actually, first and foremost, it goes back to the old adage of sometimes we miss we're right under our nose, right? I think that's just part of human nature, right? You just don't think about things that way. You're in your business every day. You're dealing with so many issues that you don't step back to really see what's there. I mean, gosh, look, right, it took me over 20 years to think of this, you know? So I think, but it was right there all along, you know? And I think that, so I think the big thing is a lot of people just don't know that it's there, or they may know that it's there, but they don't really understand how critical it is. And they haven't really stepped back to think about how integrated everything it is and how all of these critical flaws work together. And it's just easier, and sometimes it's effective, to scapegoat or just focus on one little area, or just, you know, tread water and chase shiny objects. Sometimes that works, right? But there's a lot that's missing as a result of
it will only get you so far. It's like, so let me give you I'll use my own company as an example. So one of the challenges I have, and Shane and my co-founder Shane has, is the balance between delivering on the daily activities that need to be done and then doing all of that work that you're describing, putting those processes in, the structure. So it's like this, we're constantly being pulled back and forth. Mm-hmm. We know we need to do those things, but we also need to make the next sale.
Right.
We know we need to do those things, but we also know we need to deliver the next project.
Right.
So it's just this constant, we'll get round to it. We'll get around to it. We'll get around. Oh, we'll spend the weekend, and then we never do it because we get pulled somewhere else. And it's, you know, it's really tough to just, it
is.
Yeah.
But that's where you have to be disciplined, and you have to really plan that time at a time when you know you're going to do it, and shut off all your distractions and get it done. Right. And you can do that, especially knowing now that you're conscious of it. Think about what will happen if you don't do it.
Yeah, I know we do think.
And, you know, eventually, in the short term, it won't be a problem, but eventually, all of a sudden, it's going to come to a head, and then that's going to be something that you might not be able to really surmount. Or it would be much, much better if you just dealt with it intentionally now. And I think that's another thing too. A lot of executives and leaders, even HR executives and leaders, who are really smart, really educated people, and they are great. They just haven't really thought about that, right? And these thoughts haven't occurred to them. And I think that's part of the background that I'm lucky to have, and the career experience that I've seen that, you know, maybe it was just divine intervention. I don't know, but I was able to figure it out. But again, it took me 20 years. But that's why I wrote my book, because I don't want it to take 20 years for other people. I want to help top executives see it now.
Where do people start then? Because you covered, you know, there's a lot there. Where do you recommend people start? Like, because you've structured the book in these 10 flaws. Do you then share practical examples in the book, and then how people can then implement that? What does that look like? Share some practical examples with us.
So there's a lot of different practical examples. So one of the ones that I talk about is employee engagement surveys, right? There's a solution that I've actually come up with that I call an employee disengagement survey. And that's one of the things that I always recommend. What I've found is that most employee engagement surveys are nice and good, and they tell you certain things, but a lot of people, especially HR leaders, spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's really going on based on the results of an employee engagement survey. Because the way those surveys are designed, they're not really designed to be diagnostic tools that help you really see what's going on that you need to fix. They're sort of like pulse checks, right? And it's things like, would you recommend working here to a friend, and your net promoter score type stuff. So you know, coming out of your employee engagement survey, that overall you rank as an 8 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10 on that by the majority of
this percentage of employees.
Right. Yeah. But then you think to yourself, well, okay, well, how do I get to 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10? And then that's when you start chasing shiny objects, because you don't have the information that you need. And so here's where the medical parallel comes in. When you are sick and you go to the doctor, the first thing that you do in the doctor's office is you fill out that patient symptom questionnaire. I don't know whether you've done that before. I'm sure you've done that before. And it kind of goes through all of your body systems and lists all of the possible symptoms that you could be having in each of your body systems and how severe they are. And you check boxes in that symptom questionnaire, and then your doctor looks at that and goes, okay, well, based on the symptoms that you checked as really severe in the different areas where you are, here's what I think your disease is. And then here's the appropriate treatment that I think you should do. And so to me, that's a great place to start. And it's an employee disengagement survey. I call it my company symptom questionnaire, like a patient symptom questionnaire, but for companies. And I call it an employee disengagement survey because it really helps you see what are the issues that are really going on inside.
So what are you asking then, just to be clear? Are you saying create a set of questions within the normal survey? So you're still using the survey tool, but you're asking questions like what? Give us examples.
You're giving them bad things. You're giving them lists of bad things that are going on inside the organization and saying, is this happening here?
Okay. So how
severe is it?
So then instead of getting the results and saying, okay, we need to increase engagement by X percentage, and you don't then know what are those bad things that you need to change. Right. Now you have that. So you're not just getting the data based on, the feedback and going and guessing on what you want to improve. You're like, people said this negative thing is this is the number 1, 2, and 3 negative thing that people would like us to improve.
Correct. And what I would say is, I a lot of times work with top executives. I think it's very helpful for top executives and top HR executives as a part of this process. And a lot of times this can be driven by HR, or HR can share this with the other top executives that need to participate in this process, if HR is not driving it, is before giving those questions to, or that document, that disengagement survey to every employee, they should do it themselves and work it out as an executive team and say, what do we think is really going on?
Yeah.
And that way they can get a better understanding for what they may really need to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And they have their own thoughts, and they're coming from a baseline, and they can check that against, and then later they can check that against what the employees.
How do we know what the questions are though? How do we know which are the negative things to put in as questions?
Well, so that's where my company symptom questionnaire has
So you've designed. Oh, okay. There we go.
Yeah. So it gives, and it parallels the flaws.
I see.
The book.
Okay, amazing. So you kind of done the research around those questions, what that really look like, and you can plug that into any system.
Yep. Absolutely. And of course, I mean, I did it the way I wrote it. It parallels the book as I wrote it. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean it's the end all and be all. And any company and leader can adapt it to however they want. But it gives you, if you're not using the exact tool, it gives you a good starting point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's something everyone listening can do straight away as well. And I'd be interested to see for like how it would be from an employee expected to get that survey.
Well, actually, that's
like, wow, what like the
great point.
Yeah,
that's a great question too, or a great point too, because of how it's structured and because of what it's really asking people to do, it's sensitive.
Yes, that's what I was. Yeah,
and you cannot just you can't just do it like the employee engagement survey and go, here you go, please make sure you get this done within a week, and we thank you for your input. Right? You have to first show that you are committed to dealing with these results in an honest, different way. Because otherwise, you're right.
It could be disastrous. It could be absolutely disastrous if you did that survey and did nothing about it.
Correct.
Or even if you couldn't, you should still say we can't fix. Like even if you can't, like a lot of companies will do a survey And if they can't fix one of those, they won't even mention it, as opposed to saying, look, we can't do that, but we can do this.
Yeah. And I
that
think
transparency.
Right. And a lot of companies, I think it's hard for executives and HR leaders to really deal with the results because the surveys themselves are not, like I said, they're not designed as diagnostic tools. They're designed as kind of pulse checks. And secretly, I think the executives are, and HR leaders too, if we're being honest with ourselves, are kind of hoping that things turn out okay enough that we don't have to do a whole lot of dealing with it. Right. And there are, but what that leads to is blind spots, right? The second critical flaw that I talk about, and then that's what starts the whole cycle, right? Just because they aren't reported on the employee engagement survey doesn't mean they're not there. And there's a lot of companies that I've seen in my career, and I'm sure you have too, that actually have pretty good employee engagement scores, and yet there are definitely issues that need to be dealt with that are blind to the executives and the leaders. And so that's what this survey, this disengagement survey, brings that stuff out into the open, because it's not a question of, most employee engagement surveys is like, how do you like working here, essentially, on a scale from 1 to 10. Okay, you pick a 7, but that doesn't tell you why you're not a 10, right? But the disengagement survey says, I'm only going to show you a list of things that are bad.
So you can say these are the things that make someone not like working here.
These are bad things that make people not like their company. These are bad things that hold companies back. And we are serious about trying to address these things. And on a survey, when you go to the doctor and you fill out the patient symptom questionnaire, you can't not mark a symptom, right? You're there for a reason. So it's the same thing with the company symptom questionnaire.
It's also like a doctor prescribing you medicine without having any idea what your symptoms are. That's what companies are doing in many senses. Right.
And imagine going to the doctor and your doctor says, well, so what's going on today? And you say, I'm a 7 out of 10.
Or just, I'm not feeling well. And they go, great, here's the medicine. Great. And you have no idea.
Right. And your doctor's like, well, what's going on? And you say, I don't really know. I just don't feel great. And so where do you go from there? Right. And that is exactly what happens with most employee engagement surveys. And HR leaders, we know.
So what flaw does that come under in the book?
It touches on, it comes from blind spots.
Blind spots, okay.
Which is the second critical flaw that I talk about.
Okay.
But actually I probably should have made it the first one. Because that's what leads.
That's a good point. Are these flaws in any particular order? Did you order them in a way for any reason?
Not really. I mean, I tried to present them, I started actually with politics because I thought that was the most dangerous one, and it is. And it's the one that most people don't talk about that is really there.
What's the biggest mistake people make when it comes to company politics?
Not treating it as a situational problem.
What do you mean by that?
So I think a lot of times when people are engaging in politics, and when there's politics happening in a company, you think that it's the people who are being political, right? And that's easy, right? And sometimes it is. Sometimes people behave politically because they think it will make them look better, or they will, try and bash others or suppress others to make themselves look better. Or
further their career, etc.
Or further their career, right? To get themselves things that they want. But really, a lot of times there are other root causes of politics, right? If there's not clear goals and you're doing too much, and there's a culture, there's scapegoating because you don't know what's going on inside the organization. If, there's not appropriate compensation and recognition, if the org design is flawed, right? All of these things contribute to friction that happens in the organization. And then when that friction happens, then politics happens too.
Mm-hmm.
And that.
So we can avoid a lot of that, basically, is what you're saying. We can avoid a lot, probably most actually, of those situations by actually working on all of those other contributing factors that you mentioned.
And if there are politics, and not just politics, but if you think there are issues with your people, don't just accept that at face value. And, again, think back to the quote.
You can look back at what's driving this.
Yeah, when you put good people up against a broken system, the broken system wins every time, from Gary Rumler. And hence the title of my book, Unbreak the System. And you think about it, yes, there are people who behave politically and may do it very intentionally, especially if they've had success with it, or if they've, if that's the only way that they've advanced in their careers previously. But nobody goes to work every day, including top executives, including HR leaders. Nobody gets up and goes to work every day and goes, let me see how I can be a political animal and make myself look great while making other people look bad. Right? Nobody does that, right? But it happens because of the system, because of the broken system.
If there was, they're all super important, these flaws. But if there's what one would you say adds the most value if you can get it right? And then on the flip side of that, what's one of the flaws that is the most detrimental to a company's success?
Boy, okay, these are difficult questions. So
I know it's going to be situational as well, but
the first one definitely is, it depends on the situation and what's happening in the company. And the other non-answer that I will give to that, which is not really a non-answer because it's actually the truth, but that's why people don't succeed at this, is that there isn't just one. You have to treat them all. And if you make the mistake of saying, well, let's just focus on treating this one.
Everything's interlinked is what you're saying. I'm glad that you made that answer, because that's again, and I'm happy to, that's again a mistake that I make. I think if I can fix that one, then it's going to be fine. And then it doesn't work. And that's why I keep finding myself go around and around, and I'm working on each of these elements. And so many of obviously I didn't know we was even having this podcast until we had a conversation on LinkedIn. And it's so funny to now look at these flaws and think, wow, like they're all interlinked and they all have an impact on each. It's like a ripple effect.
Absolutely. It's a huge, huge ripple effect. And so, I'm sorry to not be able to directly answer your question with one.
You did answer it. Is that
less soundbitey?
You did answer it, because you answered it because if you would have answered saying this is the most critical one, that kind of goes against everything you're talking about.
Right. It does. Yeah. And that's the real differentiator. You have to treat all of the flaws. And I mean, again, that company symptom questionnaire that I talk about is a good way to help get you started with what's the biggest one. But it can't just be, oh, well, let's just tackle this one and then ignore everything else. It's got to be, this is a journey for us. And, we're going to start here, but.
But within the book, though, for each of the flaws, you do share some steps that people can take.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could you share one more step in one of the flaws? Like an example of some of the steps you take. Choose one of your favorites.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. I think another one is, I'll go back to standard operating procedures, right? I think because you and I were talking about it too. So many companies don't do it. So make sure that you are writing down standard operating procedures. Don't keep that stuff in people's heads. I mean, because that's another one where it winds up going back to HR, right? Because talent management, HR has become a whole thing in companies now with succession planning.
I was literally about to say that. Exactly. Yeah. Right? That knowledge is walking out the door. Oh,
knowledge is walking out the door. Right. And you're right. Succession planning is really important, but and actually, I just contributed an article to Entrepreneur Magazine here a couple of weeks ago about this very subject. If you're focused so much on succession planning, or you're worried about succession planning in your company, and let's face it, every executive is, every company is, every HR leader is, don't focus just on your leaders. Focus on your processes and your procedures, and make sure that you're taking the time to document that stuff properly. Because that's what's going to help your succession planning as well. It's really going to reduce the time to effectiveness when you hire new people. It reduces turnover. It helps the underperformers
the
and the
experience
average
as well,
be much
right?
more successful. What's that?
The experience that new hire is going to have coming in, having all of that
Absolutely.
information at hand, makes such a great employee experience coming into the organization. The onboard,
Absolutely.
so much.
Yep. Absolutely.
All of that IP as well that we lose,
Yes.
just go straight out the door.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's kind of one thing that you'd want people to take away from the book, what would that be, and why?
Yeah, I think I've talked about it, but it's worth saying again. It's treat the entire system. Don't think that your issues are just caused by your people. Really look at the system and figure out what's broken in your company's system, and then treat everything in the system that's broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love, what's that quote one more time? Because I love it.
It's when you put good people up against a broken system, the broken system wins almost every time. It's a quote by Gary Rumler, an author from a long time ago. And there's actually another book that I really love, which is a book called Switch by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. I think it's the best book on change out there. And they say something in a very similar way. And they say, what looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. Mm-hmm. And that's very parallel to what, those two ideas, right? What looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. And when you put good people up against a broken system, the broken system wins almost every time. That really sums up.
I love it.
What my book is about.
I love it because so many times, I love it because so many times whenever there's a people issue, you immediately look at what's the issue with those individuals.
Right.
You're not thinking, is it a system problem? Right. Is it part of
it is.
Yeah.
But it's a system problem. Almost every single time it's a system problem, and it's not many times it's not the people at all. It's the system. But sometimes it's the people, but they're not operating in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
And they never are.
Well, look, before I let you go, where can people reach out to you if they want to say hello, connect with you, and where can they grab a copy of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. Also my website, which is just joshrovner.com, and the book is available on Amazon.
Amazing. Well, look, thanks so much, Josh. It's been a pleasure. And I can definitely attest to everyone that if you do reach out to Josh on LinkedIn, he will reply because that's how you're here today. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us and share the knowledge. I've definitely learned a lot. I've got a lot of work to do. The only takeaway from this call is I've got a lot of work to do as well. So
thank you. I'm glad that it was valuable for you, and hopefully the audience finds it valuable as well. It's an honor to be here.
I'm sure they will. Well, listen, all the best. I've enjoyed the weekend, and I'll see you again soon, all right?
All right. Take care. Thanks.
Bye.